everyone. I'm Jasmine Haynes, and I'm here with our Episcopal leader, Bishop James E. Swanson, Sr. Bishop Swanson, thank you so much for being with us here today.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Bishop Swanson, after the conclusion of the special session of General Conference, you went to all 11 districts in the Mississippi Conference in a matter of 2 weeks. And you went to go around and tell people what came out of General Conference 2019 and how it will impact the conference. We know that the Council of Bishops supported the One Church plan, and there were bishops across the connection who individually and publicly supported one plan over another. For those who don't know what you shared at the district gatherings, I want to start by asking you one of the questions that you probably got the most, and that is, why did you choose not to take a position or support a plan?
Well, that's very simple. Not really simple, but simple for me to answer because I've talked about it 11 times and really even before. First of all, let me just answer one other question that precedes that, and that is the fact that the Council of Bishops, in essence, did not really support the One Church plan.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is that what the Council of Bishops actually did was they presented all 3 plans for the General Conference delegates to look at. And they added the caveat. When I say they, the majority of the Council of Bishops, and added the caveat that the majority of the bishops had a preference for the One Church plan. Now that went out in a kind of a spin that the majority of the bishops, or that the bishops, everybody kept saying that, supported the One Church plan. And when you say majority, that means that 50% plus 1 at least supported, which meant that there were many other bishops who did not. So I just really want people to understand that. I decided, because early on our position in the Council of Bishops was not to support any one of the plans. But I prayed about it and even went off on a 3-day spiritual retreat to search my heart and soul as to not so much the plans, but what is it that I could give my heart and my soul to. And while I was away, I also went back and reread all 3 plans because I wanted to understand what it was that I was supporting, if I did support. And I realized something, and that was that none of the 3 plans that were being offered, of course there were other plans too that a lot of people are not aware of, because those 3 plans came from the commission on the way forward, which did not vote. They did not recommend any plan either. But there were other plans that were submitted by other persons as well. But none of those plans got us to where we wanted to get. I mean, the hue and the cry across Mississippi Conference was, no matter what plan passes, let's be done with it and never have to bring the issue back up again. Well, none of those 3 plans would have gotten us there. And I wish to God it could have, but, and one of the reasons it can't is because our church polity says that no general conference can bind the next general conference. And I hope people understand what I mean by that. And that is, whatever decision is made at one general conference does not mean that that ends the debate. It can be brought up again at the next general conference. And so I knew no matter which one of the plans would be enacted, we would be right back at the table again come 2020.
Right.
And I know everybody wanted that to be over with. So I knew neither one of those plans could do that. Secondly, I also knew that after General Conference 2019 was over, that we still had to be the church. Everybody seemed to be putting everything on hold. I wasn't. And many of our leaders were not across Mississippi. We were planning for what comes after that General Conference session of 2019 was over. And so I knew that I was still going to have to be the chief pastor for everybody in Mississippi, regardless to which plan they supported. And I really did believe in my heart, and I still believe in my heart today, that if I would have made any choice of any plan known as far as I was concerned, that would have put me in a position of not being able to be trusted by certain portions of the conference to be their pastor. and I needed to be pastor more than I needed to choose a plan. And so that was there's a second reason why I decided not to support any one of the plans, because I felt it would put me in a place where I could not truly be trusted to be the pastor of everybody, because I knew another day was coming, and that day was going to be the day after General Conference. So I chose to do that, and I stick by that particular decision, not to support any of them, because I didn't think they would get us to where we really needed to be.
The commission on the way forward was tasked with coming up with literally what their name says, a way forward.
Right.
But even they couldn't decide or make a recommendation of one of the plans that they worked together and came up with. Right. Why is that?
Well, and that's interesting, because the leadership of the Council of Bishops literally asked them that, which plan do you endorse, and they refused to tell us. And one of the reasons they said is, after 18 months of meeting together, we developed a sense of community. Those of us who were progressives and those of us who were traditionalists, we really felt that a vote would break our sense of community, our sense of being together. And we thought that being together after that 18 months was more important than making the decision on a plan. And so we give this to you. This is our best work that we can put forward, and these are the best options we can give the church as to legislatively how to get through this issue around human sexuality. And so their answer to us was, we did not want to break community. Now the interesting part is, I really think that might have been an answer for us, because I think what they were trying to tell us is that there is no legislative solution that would create a critical mass of support. And when I'm talking about a critical mass, at least 60, and maybe even 70 to 75% of the people, the delegates going to General Conference, say, this is really what we think the church ought to do. And they really believed in their heart, no matter what plan we voted for, it would never have a critical mass of support. And that maybe the best thing to do would be to do what they did, and that is to spend some time in conversation with each other, allow the Holy Spirit to talk to each other, and coming out of that, develop a sense of community and allow the Holy Spirit to lead us forward, as over against us trying to legislate that. So I think they gave us a way. But sometimes when there's so much noise going on, when everybody's clamoring for the answer, a answer, I think it's so plain that we didn't want to hear it because we were impatient, and we wanted, as I said earlier, for it to be over with, when maybe that's the sign of the times in which we're living in, a time of what a friend of mine now is calling ambiguity.
Bishop Swanson, as you travel the state, you talk to a lot of people. What seemed to be some of the most prevalent comments and concerns that you heard around this conference?
Wow. Well, one was that though we disagree, and I think that was obvious, we still want to be together, and that was gut-wrenching for me. I don't want to see my local church split over this issue. Help us not to split over this issue, because even comments like, I'm a traditionalist, but I have people in my family who are homosexuals, and I don't know how to talk to them. Teach us how to do that. I heard things like that. I had progressives who said to me, this is my church and I don't want to leave, even though I disagree with the decision made at General Conference 2019. Tell me there's still room for me in this church, And those kinds of things I heard. And I do think that we live in a day and a time that is very difficult for traditional Christians to understand. And that is that there is a questioning of authority that is just everywhere. And I think the church needs to understand that we just live in that day and that time where the government is not trusted, where school systems are not trusted, where what we call our sacred institutions, even families, nobody trusts any of our sacred institutions any longer. And the church is the last sort of institution to be under attack. where there's just no trust. And what we have to do is to find a way to rebuild the lost trust. Because there used to be a time when could just say as a preacher, well, you do this because the Bible says so. Well, they don't even trust the Bible anymore. And so, which I know comes as a shock to some people's ears. So it's going to be, I think, the power of your relationship as Jesus had with the disciples. He spent time with them, and they learned to trust him and to trust his word and to trust what God was saying in and through him. And we've got to do what we are afraid to do, I think, or feel we can't do, and that is we've got to come out of our walls of our church and out of the walls of our own thinking and really be in relationship with people so people can see the Jesus really in us and not just in the written pages of our Sunday school lessons and our doctrinal statements and stuff like that, but they see it in the way in which we treat one another. So yeah, I mean, those questions are being asked. How do we get there? And I keep saying to folk, we can get there, just like the children of Israel asked the question, how do we get to the promised land? And Moses said, well, we follow the pillar by day, the cloud by day, and the pillar of fire by night. We follow the Holy Spirit. And this is something the church has got to learn. You can't map it out. You've got to walk it out.
Bishop Swanson, people asked a lot of questions about a lot of things that weren't actually directly related to the purpose of the called special session of General Conference. Yeah. Can you speak to specifically what was supposed to be addressed at General Conference 2019?
Well, there were basically two pieces that were addressed. One was around whether or not we would ordain self-avowed practicing homosexuals. And the second one was around whether or not we would allow our clergy to perform same-sex marriages. And of course, the other attached to that was whether or not we would allow same-sex marriages within our sanctuaries. I mean, and the reason why I bring that up is that we're getting hammered, so to speak, in the media, that we don't want LGBTQIA people in our churches, and that's not the issue. The issue is around ordination and around same-sex marriage. Now, for LGBTQIA people, they hear that as you're not fully including me. Doesn't mean that we're not included, but we're not fully included because you don't give us the same rights you give heterosexual persons, and that is the right to be married or the right to be ordained. And so that was the question. And so as a result of it, you will hear words like "y'all don't love us," "you don't care about us," and that kind of conversations. And so I just think our people need to at least understand what the issues were. It was around marriage, and it was also around ordination. And those were the two pieces that we were called to grapple with, and those were the issues we actually did grapple with. Now, there was some fallout, other things that were part of that, but those were the two issues. And so a lot of times you get questions about things that we were not dealing with. Case in point, even at General Conference, there was a lot of conversation about other sins. And why didn't we deal with other sins? Because that special call session was called specifically to deal with the issues around human sexuality, and not called to deal with other sins like divorce. So, used to be we didn't allow divorced pastors. We did, and so why aren't you dealing with that? Why aren't you dealing with adultery? Because that's not what it was called for. Simple as that.
So the group of petitions that were related to the traditional plan were what was adopted at General Conference. But there were several petitions that were sent to the Judicial Council for review of their constitutionality. What is the Judicial Council, A? And B, why were some petitions sent to them?
Okay. Well, the Judicial Council, the best way to explain it is equivalent to the United States version of the Supreme Court. Okay. And they're the group who determines whether or not something is constitutional, and that means whether or not it does not violate the Constitution of the United Methodist Church, not the United States. The United Methodist Church developed a constitution at the merger of the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church, because we were known as the Methodist Church up until 1968. And there were other iterations of our name as well, because at one time we were called the Methodist Episcopal Church. And then in 1939, we became the Methodist Church. And in 1968, when we merged with the Evangelical United Brethren Church, we took the United out of that name and we became United Methodist, and we formed our own constitution. And you can find that in your Book of Discipline. At the very beginning of the Book of Discipline, you will find the Constitution of the United Methodist Church. And so any legislation that is passed, it has to pass constitutional muster. It cannot be in conflict with our Constitution. And the Judicial Council is the body that determines whether or not it is in conflict with the Constitution. And therefore, what happens at every general conference, usually there is a motion made that certain petitions, that there may be some questions about their constitutionality, are then referred to the Judicial Council for them to look at to see whether or not they are constitutionally, whether or not they have constitutional standing. We had just about everything that dealt with the traditional plan was sent on to be reviewed by the Judicial Council, which meets on April 25th, 26th to determine their constitutionality.
Bishop Swanson, some of the other petitions that were sent to the Judicial Council were questions about the role of the Board of Ordained Ministry, which is often referred to as BOOM, and the role of the bishop and his or her work with the Board of Ordained Ministry. What does the Board of Ordained Ministry do, and what are some of the joint or shared responsibilities that are between the Board of Ordained Ministry and the bishop?
Well, the Board of Ordained Ministry is what we call the credentialing, in a sense, credentialing organization for our clergy, especially around ordination of elders and deacons. The best way to help people understand that is, as a lawyer would have to pass the state bar in order to practice. Doctor have medical examinations that they have to pass in order to be able to practice medicine. And so our teacher would have to pass state examination in order to actually be employed by a Board of Education. Well, it's the same thing for us in the United Methodist Church. Every annual conference has a Board of Ordained Ministry who would examine pastors. They would take written tests, have oral interviews, psychological testing, and all kinds of tests. And if they are approved, not only through that testing procedure, but some other things they have to go through, then the Board of Ordained Ministry at that point would literally say that this person should continue on through the process until they get to the point of becoming ready to be ordained a deacon or an elder. And they would recommend that to me. And they would say, Bishop, this person should be ordained. Currently, the bishop has no say-so other than to ordain. I mean, they make the recommendations, they take them through the credentialing process. And so as bishop, then I would ordain that person, either deacon or as an elder. I cannot ordain as a deacon or an elder without the credentialing process having taken place. So we share that in a kind of a symbiotic relationship, so to speak. Now, with the recently passed legislation, there are some things that would change. One of them is that I also am the person who recommends the persons who actually serve on the Board of Ordained Ministry.
Okay.
And so now, however, what the legislation, if it is upheld as constitutional, what I would have to do is to certify that the persons that I recommend would be people who would uphold the Book of Discipline in its entirety. And that is the whole book. They would have to certify that they would uphold the whole Book of Discipline in its entirety. And that's why that's being recommended to, or being passed on to the Judicial Council for them to review. What do we mean by certify? And what do we mean by the book of discipline in its entirety. And I would want to know that because as a bishop, I would not want my decision to be overturned. I would want to know exactly what I'm doing at that point. So we need some leadership around that. So there are things like that. There's one that also calls for me not to ordain if the person does not have the certification or the credentialing or the approval of the Board of Ordained Ministry, which right now I can't do anyway. So I don't see that as being an undue burden.
Bishop Swanson, another petition that passed related to the traditional plan was about the complaint process and just resolutions, which most people, if you're sitting on a pew every Sunday, probably aren't even sure what that is. So could you define those for us and explain how those two things impacts local churches here in Mississippi in the conference and in the connection?
And then I've thought a great deal about this even since I've done these 11 pieces. To me, it is one of the bonuses or one of the blessings of being a part of a connectional system. And that a local congregation should not have to worry about whether or not their pastor has been vetted, whether or not that pastor who has been appointed to them is a person of credibility, a person who has been theologically trained, or someone who they should trust. But when that trust is broken, there should be a process in place to make sure that that is handled in a fair, just, and equitable fashion. And so part of that is the complaint process, so that when this person who is a local pastor or a deacon or an elder is accused of breaking that trust, there is a process in place that is fair, just, and equitable. And so the complaint process is at that point triggered by either a written complaint. Usually we want a written and signed complaint to carry that person through, to try to determine the truthfulness of the complaint and how we might resolve it. Rather than take it all the way through what we would call a church trial, there is this thing called just resolution, which means that the person bringing the complaint and the person against whom the complaint is lodged can sit down with the bishop or either a third person who they both might choose to be or the bishop might choose, to be the arbitrator, and they can come up with what they believe is a just resolution. And so at that point, the complainant usually drives that because they're the one who feel they have been injured as a result of this, and they will literally say, this is what I believe would help me to know that I have been heard and that this is a just decision, and it now helps me to feel that you have taken my complaint seriously, and then the person who the complaint is brought against is repentant of what they've done and also agrees to that. And that's usually written up, signed by all parties. The complainant, the respondent, who is the person who the complaint is being brought against, and the bishop would all sign that and say, this is the way in which we're going to handle that. And that's called a just resolution. And that sometimes takes maybe as little as a day or two. Other times it may take several months working back and forth, trying to solve that. And it really is a very complicated process, but it is a process that I believe in. Yeah. And there are some new rules around it. That is that some people really believe that we have not allowed the complainant to always know why we dismissed the complaint. In Mississippi, we've always done that. I know since I've been here, I can't testify before, but we've always told the complainant, that your complaint has no basis in law or in fact. Now they took the fact out, so now it's just saying no basis in law. In other words, that what you're bringing the complaint about, there is no law to oversee that. That's the reason why that complaint is not being not given just consideration. But we've always done that. And then there's another piece to that that says that we would tell the complainant exactly what we imposed as a result of your complaint. Well, they can't sign it without seeing it because it's all there in writing as to what would happen. So we've always done that. So I'm assuming that in some annual conferences they feel like that has not been done. And so that's kind of the just resolution in a nutshell, and the complaint. There's a little bit more to it, but I'd be here a long time. Yeah.
So another petition that you talked about at the district gatherings was on minimum penalties. What is minimum penalties going to mean for the United Methodist Church now, and how exactly does that work?
Wow. Provided that minimum penalties, I'm not really sure right now whether or not it removes the process of just resolution, which I explained earlier. And if it does, then this would mean in the case, because this is only this minimal penalties, which is really comparable to what I would just call mandatory sentencing out in the secular world. This only is around the case of persons performing same-sex marriage. It is not on any other violation. It is only same-sex marriage. And again, you need to understand, the only reason it's about same-sex marriage is because the special call session of General Conference could only deal with that. Okay. So what it says, if a person does perform a same-sex marriage, the first offense, there's a mandatory sentencing of 1 year suspension without pay. Okay. The second offense is loss of credentials, and the person is, of course, summarily dismissed from serving in the United Methodist Church. So that would greatly affect the church, because that would mean that would be a one-time grace, and the one-time grace would be the 1 year suspension, and then the second time that the person would do that, then they would lose their credentials. Now, there are a lot of more things involved in that, and that would be, I think they still would have the right of church trial and that kind of thing. But if they were convicted, then 1 year suspension without pay. Second year, you lose your credentials.
We were there moments after General Conference 2019 came to a conclusion. And even though some people were pleased with the outcome and some people were not, you didn't really hear any celebrating going on. There weren't smiles when it was all over. What was your sense of the mood after General Conference?
Wow. Well, for some people, it was a great deal of sadness. For those who felt that the decision of General Conference 2019 was a decision that was hurtful to them. That was a great deal of sadness for those. I think that was this kind of deer in the headlights. Like what really happened? Because everything went so fast. But the other part of that was, even those who felt in their hearts that they were, and who felt that the legislation that was passed was legislation they wanted, because they loved the Lord with all their heart and their soul. You can't love Jesus without loving people. And I think there was a great deal of sadness in their heart about the sadness that they saw from other folk. And that's a part of being a Christ follower. I mean, when you follow Jesus, you can't rejoice at somebody else's hurt. And so it's not that the persons who were for the traditional plan were not relieved that the traditional plan passed, but they were not rejoicing that in passing the traditional plan, that people who didn't want it passed were not hurting. If you understand, so it's so nobody really rejoiced because no one wanted to hurt anybody. And I really wish in my heart, I think some people do understand that, but I think that it's very difficult when you've been gladiators and fighting, and you so-called lose. I think it's very difficult for you to look at the person who you believe won and believe that they still have a love for you in their heart. And so at the end of the day, I think there was a great deal of sorrow and sadness. And the last piece of that is there were times during that general conference when we said things to each other that did not please God. I mean, there were moments in the heat of battle that we dishonored God. And we brought hurt and injury. And when I say hurt and injury, it was enough to go around. It was on both sides of the battle. And I really think with hindsight and with prayer, I don't think we would have said it. Because the part that brought hurt to me was the thought of people watching that who were not Christians, and whether or not they would now want to be Christians. Not United Methodists, but want to be Christians after seeing how we treated one another. Doesn't matter what side you were on. We were very mean to each other. And I think that's the part that brought me sadness, because I'm always, everybody has a dominant theme in their life. And my dominant theme is I want everybody to know Jesus. I just do. I just think that a man or woman without Jesus is missing something that is very special for the living of their days. And I want them all to know him, to know Jesus. And I don't want to be guilty of saying something or doing something to stop somebody. And I just know that while we met in St. Louis, we said some very painful things to each other. And if I was a non-believer, I would say, wow, if that's loving, I sure don't want to be a part of that. So, yeah.
So there have been a lot of comments about the United Methodist Church and how we don't live up to our denominational slogan, open hearts, open minds, open doors. Tell those who didn't attend the district gatherings your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I got kind of riled up at the district gatherings around that, because I think, again, I was a part of the early unveiling of that. Got a chance to see it up close and personal. And we got hammered even back when it first came out, because the people were saying, we don't live up to it. That's not who we are. And UMCOM, when they introduced it, said pretty openly and honestly, no, we don't. But it's purely aspirational. It's what we're hoping to become.
And when you say UMCOM, you mean United Methodist Communications?
Thank you, yeah, United Methodist Communications. When they first introduced it, they said it's what we're hoping to become. Sometimes you got to speak something into existence before it really happens, And I think for us, I think we're further down the road to that. I mean, I'm a living, breathing example of that. I mean, that was a time when people in the South, white people in the South, did not want black folk in their church. And today I'm bishop of Mississippi. I mean, so you're going to still be mad at Mississippi about its racist past, and even some racism is still here now. No, you want to celebrate how far we've come. It gives us momentum to continue to move forward. I mean, we've done some pretty bad things, but we've also done some really great things. And so Yeah, open hearts, open minds, open doors. We're moving in that direction. We hadn't gotten there. That's why Jesus came, because we weren't perfect. He came to move us in that direction. It's almost like those people who misunderstand the United Methodist Church. They think that means we are united. A better word for us would be uniting Methodists, if we wanted to do it that way, because we're in the process of becoming a people who are moving towards perfection. We are a perfecting church. We're not perfect. We're on our way to becoming that. And so I always say to my people, when folk get on you about that, I always say to them, well, I'm trying my best not to be a hypocrite, because I really do believe in what I'm saying. There's just sometimes my actions don't live it out. And anytime you see me not living out what I'm saying, you pray for me, because I would hope that my today is better than my yesterday, and that my tomorrow will be better than my today. And so that's what we're doing, Yeah, and we're going to stumble, we're going to fall. Every last one of us, including your bishop, is guilty of not living up to my highest values. But at least I know I have a goal that I'm trying to reach. So, yeah.
So it's not that we are at that destination. We have reached open hearts, open minds, open doors. It's more that we are on the journey.
We're on the journey
to get there.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. And by God's grace, we'll get there.
Bishop Swanson, you recently sat down with Ezra Hall here in Mississippi, who is with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. And in that interview, you said, and I quote, "We are more than this issue." What did you mean by that?
Oh, well, I really meant that, and I didn't mean this as a demeaning of the issue. The issue is important. It's important to all of us, whether we realize it or not. But that's not the sum total of who United Methodists are. In fact, I've said this and sometimes gotten beat up for saying it, but the very fact that we're having the discussion is a point of celebration, because we're a church that encourages open dialogue and open conversation. There are some churches who don't encourage that. They say, this is who we are, this is what we believe, we want to talk about it. We're not that kind of a church. We are an open dialogue church where we do openly discuss things that we disagree on. But not only that, not only are we more in the sense of than what happened at GC 2019, but at the same time, while we were having that discussion at GC 2019 here in Mississippi, our youth were gathering in Jackson at Christ United Methodist Church, and they were having our youth gathering, and I got a video from them that our conference later did, in which the young people said to me, "We're praying for you, Bishop." I mean, they don't know how much that meant to me. That they were meeting and they were having fun in Jesus, and they stopped long enough to say, "We know you're dealing with a very important issue, but we're here telling people about Jesus Christ." And they always give invitation during the gathering. So I know there were many young people who came forward and gave their life to Christ. And their whole lives have been changed. That while we were fussing and debating with each other at General Conference in St. Louis, young folk were being introduced to Jesus Christ. And while we were doing that, United Methodist Committee on Relief, what we fondly call UMCOR, were helping flood victims and people devastated by hurricanes and typhoons all over the world. Because when these hurricanes and these typhoons and floods happen, once the cameras are gone, we're always the last ones there. I mean, Katrina hit. I got here 10 years after Katrina when I arrived. I think it was about 10 years when I arrived. It was 2005 when it hit. Yeah, and I came in 2012, 7 years later. But even if we were still finding people whose homes were devastated by Katrina, and we were rebuilding those houses. And in fact, right on into my second quadrennium, we were still building homes and rebuilding lives. What I mean by we're more than that is that we not only do things like that, but families that have been devastated by divorce, by deaths, by fires that devastate their homes, young people who want to go to college. We provide scholarships for that. I mean, it's just so much that this church does. And I think that's what gets us in trouble. It's because when we cry, we're the proverbial Mighty Mouse in my day and time. And now I guess, Captain America, whatever on the TV, whatever, or Wonder Woman, here we come to save the day. And that's what gets us in trouble, is because we can't hear a plaintive cry without responding as the United Methodist Church. And so we just do it. And yet we don't realize where we are. I mean, I went to India and saw our church in action. I went to the Central African Republic. And if anybody can tell me that they know what a Central African Republic is, I'll give you a big hug, because most of us don't even know. But we're getting ready. While we were in St. Louis, we took a break. And the delegation from the Central African Republic and some of the members of the Mississippi Conference met in a crowded hallway to talk about how we might assist them in doing mission and ministry while we were arguing about that issue. I mean, come on, people. We're more than this. We do so much more through Christ Jesus. And that's what I meant by living in ambiguity, is that in the midst of fussing, people who differ on that issue are still doing mission and ministry. And when you look around and you see all that we do as a church, my God, I can't help but celebrate that I'm a United Methodist, and I'm proud of it. Extremely proud of being United Methodist. I'm not ashamed of it at all. I am very, very proud of who I am and what we do. And so we are more. We're much more than that. And all the people need to do is stop harping on one thing that you disagree on. There are millions of things that we agree on. Yeah.
At a district gathering, you said that Jesus did not leave you with the book of discipline. Why did you say that? And what was the point that you were trying to make? Table one.
Okay, that's interesting, because that just kind of came from out of left field. Basically, what I was trying to get people to understand is that the church has always been in the process of learning that Jesus left us with a very basic message that God loves us, and that his sacrifice on Calvary was to prove God's love for us, and that sacrifice did wash away our sins, and that if we love him, we would do our very best to keep his commandments. But he never said anything to us about how to run a church. Not at all. And so basically, you take the Apostle Paul was the best architect of the church as we know it. And if you read most of his letters are about how to be a church in waiting. Because in a sense, we never thought, or the early church never thought, that we would still be here come 2019. I mean, they really thought Jesus was coming back pretty soon. And so we've had to learn, how do we live in waiting, in anticipation of Jesus coming back? And so as a result of it, we've had to figure out what kind of governance, how do we govern ourselves? How do we live together? How do we determine who's called to preach and who's not called to preach? What officers do we need to have in the church? How do we even handle church property? You remember the big dispute in the book of Acts about all of the goods that were brought in, and how did you distribute it? The Hebrew widows were getting more of the goods than the Gentile widows, and so they were fighting about that and fussing about that. So as issues arose, the church found ways to deal with them, and they created rules. Jesus didn't. They did. And we do that today as issues arise in the church. Where did Easter lilies come from? There's nowhere in the Bible about Easter lilies. So the church decided we want Easter lilies in the church, and at my home church, they used to sell them for $25, or whatever. And so everybody wanted them. They would buy the Easter lilies and they put the Easter lilies in the church. And then after church, everybody go get their Easter lily and take it home. But so it didn't. So we created all of these rules and regulations. And so I was trying to get people to understand that a lot of things that we do in the church is not in the Bible. It's and that's where the book of discipline comes from. It comes from us trying to order our life as a church. And what is it that's in the book of discipline that ought to be germane and basic for every local church, for every annual conference? And that's what we're trying to figure out as we move through all of this. And I don't think many people think of it that way. I think they think of everything as being, say, in the Bible, and it's not. There are rules and regulations that are pretty much man-made, and then there are rules and regulations that are biblical in the sense that the Bible does speak about them, but there are others. Even Paul says in one of his letters, "Now I say this." Is that more authoritative than when he said, "The Lord says this"? I don't know. It's how we interpret it. And so a part of that is I kind of threw that out to say to people that's why every 4 years, when we meet as a general church with representatives from each annual conference, we have the freedom to look at the book of discipline, which is not the Bible.
Might want to repeat that one again for people.
Which is not the Bible. It gets its foundational understanding from the Bible, but the rules around how you elect a lay leader or how you handle property issues, those things are open for debate every 4 years because we learn different things. We run into different scenarios that we did not. Laws change in how people look at us and all that kind of stuff as far as the state is concerned. And then we have to adjust our laws as a part of that. So every 4 years we meet to look at it, and we just come up with what we think is the best thinking for that day and for that time. Now I know there are other things that don't change, and one of those in the book of discipline is called restrictive rules. You cannot change the restrictive rules. And if you want to know what restricted rules are, get your book of discipline, look at it. It's in there. It's called restricted rules. But that's what I meant by that, is that Jesus did not create the book of discipline. The book of discipline was created by the United Methodist Church. Okay? And by the Methodist Church and by the Evangelical United Brethren Church. This goes go back, and by John Wesley. Okay, so I just was kind of poking fun at folk. You need to know a little bit more about your church history.
So you've said on more than one occasion that the church was born in conflict. Talk about that. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of times, especially today, and I realize it because there's a lot of tension in the world right now, and everybody's looking for that one place I can go and have peace and quiet. And they really want the church to be a place of security where there's not a lot of conflict. But it's just a part of life, and church has always had its share of conflict. When you really think about it, Jesus had 12 disciples, right? And one of them was a man named Judas. You remember him? Many of us would have actually voted Judas off the bus. We would not have wanted him there had we been privy to the knowledge Jesus had. Because it's obvious when Jesus is instituting the Last Supper or the Lord's Supper, the Holy Eucharist, that Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him. Because Jesus says, go do what you're going to do. But we would have voted him out of there. Jesus didn't. Now, a question that I would ask is, when I get to heaven, since I've got my explanation, I want Jesus' explanation. Because my explanation is, well, he needed somebody to betray him. That kind of sounds crass. But maybe Jesus was trying right up to the last minute to prove to Judas that he loved him. And I even believe, I'm so bold as to believe, had Judas not hung himself, Had Judas been around, had he at least been with the disciples, or had at least been, had not hung himself, I think that Jesus would have forgiven him. That's the kind of, because if he can say from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, I think he would have said, I forgive you too, Judas. So sometimes, so the controversy was even in Jesus. I mean, even in Jesus' day and time, there were people who were part of the merry band who caused problems. And he never kicked them out. And then you got this big fight with, was it Ananias and Sapphira, I think it was, who where he was supposed to sell the land and he didn't sell the land, or he sold the land and he's supposed to give back money and he didn't get the money. I mean, and this was church folk, y'all. Y'all keep forgetting all of this stuff with church people. Then the fight about whether the Gentiles should be in the church or not in whether they had to be circumcised or not circumcised. All of Paul's letters were written because there was craziness going on in the church. And we were trying to figure out how to live together as a church. And so there was never an era in the church where there was no conflict. There was always conflict. And the church was always trying to figure it out. So, and the more rules we had did not stop people from being ungodly. I don't care how many rules we had. We always had people in the family who were ungodly. Some were just plain old misled about what they did. Others were just immature in the faith. And you remember the story that really gets me is the splitting up of Paul and Barnabas over John Mark. And yet later on, Paul literally says, "Bring John Mark to me." Now, it never says that he and Barnabas got back together, but it does say that he realizes the maturity that John Mark somewhere along the way met Paul's expectations of growth and development in his life. So there's always been conflict in church. And so I'm just trying to get people to stop this pulling their hair out and saying that we church leaders like myself, bishops and all, that somehow we are to blame for conflict because we ain't leading right. The conflict is just in the church. It's just a part of human nature, and it's a part of the working out of the church through the power and presence of the Holy Spirit. And so sometimes we bishops might let you down, just like your pastors let down, just like treasurers let local churches down, just like a Sunday school teacher sometimes lets a church down. That's just a part of life, but it's also conflict is just a part of the church. And those who are mature, the Bible says, restore such a one in love. So as you grow, you're not only more tolerant of other people's sins. I know I'm more tolerant at 69 than I was when I was 29. Because in those intervening 40 years, I made a lot of mistakes. And God has continued to love me. And I'm glad God has. And so for other people who make mistakes, I'm more tolerant. And so I'm just trying to get us to understand that God is working this out and be patient. I know some are so angry that they want to leave now because church ain't doing the way they want to do it. But it's like playing football. Just because they want to let you be the quarterback don't mean you got to stop having fun playing the game. So hang in there. We're going to be fine.
So Bishop Swanson, you've been to every district throughout the conference. How do you feel about the feedback that you've gotten as you stopped through all these district gatherings?
It's been a mixed bag, but by and large, it's been really good. I've got a chance to really know where people really are in Mississippi. By and large, everybody pretty much surmises that Mississippi is a traditional conference in their belief systems. But what I've really also heard is this tremendous desire for people to know that we do love folk in Mississippi. They really want people to know that. But one of the things that really has hit me is this piece that we're working on right now, and that is folk are really wanting to know, how do we talk to each other in a way that enhances the kingdom of God? So we're really working hard on that, and that's coming from, and really that whole idea We could claim credit for it, but it really came from the hue and cry of the people who were asking, who were saying, I'm a traditional person. I really believe in traditional interpretation of scripture, but I know that I've got cousins and uncles and aunties and aunties, excuse me, and others who are part of my family who I need to talk to. And I don't know how to talk to them. Help me learn how to do that in the love and the spirit of Jesus. And so a lot of that's coming from that side. Others are saying to us, when the church learns how to be patient, they'll figure this out. That was a real gift to me. I've heard people who were still somewhat angry, and those are the ones who want us to just stand straight up and tell everybody it's the way it's going to be, and not be so nice, And but by and large, I hear people saying we're really grappling not only with this issue, but we're grappling with the issue of just being a Christian, and help us to learn how to do that in some wonderful ways. We've had people step up and say to us that when you learn these new tools, not only do we want to come, but we like to be trained, and we want to use those tools in our own churches, and love to go out and teach other people how to do it as well. So yeah, it's been and I think in the last piece I would say this is how many people have stopped to pray for me. I mean, it's been mind-boggling, or to say to me, you know I'm praying for you, and I said, yeah, because I sometimes I'm a little independent, I kind of want to walk my own, kind of be like where I'm from, Texas, like a Lone Ranger cowboy, I do. So I tend to do that sometimes. But I'll say, well, yeah, I know. And they said, no, I'm serious. I'm really praying for you. And that gets me. That just grabs my heart. And I said, sure, I hear you. And I said, I hear you with my heart, not just my ears. Because I know that the role I play and the things that I do or attempt to do for Mississippi these last 6.5 years, I could not have done it had it not been for the prayers of the people. So, yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot. Things I thought I knew about Mississippi have either been affirmed, and I've learned new things about it, just about the solid faith of this annual conference. These folk love the Lord. They do. They love him with all their heart, and they want to serve him. They want to serve him, and they want to serve him with excellence. I've learned that.
Well, Bishop Swanson, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to sit here and share these things with us today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for doing this. This has helped me to process more.
If you'd like to learn more about other things that were happening at the district gatherings, take a look at James Mason's videos on the trainings that Bishop Swanson previously mentioned. You can also look at David Stott's videos as he talks about in more detail things related to pensions and how that affects the conference and local churches, as well as disaffiliation. You can always keep up with what's going on as it pertains to General Conference if you visit the conference website at www.mississippi-umc.org/GC 2019. You can also catch up or make sure you stay tuned by following the Mississippi Conference's Facebook page, which is the Mississippi United Methodist Conference. Make sure you stay connected to and receive the announcements by subscribing to our news and updates, which is at the bottom of the conference website. Until next time.